Hi, I'm Rick Roller. Thanks for watching How to Conquer Telephobia. You know, the other day I was talking to several friends of mine, David Stephenson and Joe Zom. Also in this informal group was another gentleman by the name of Mark Jones. In this informal conversation, we were talking about what is the one single thing, the one thing that we could do to help agents be more productive. And it kept coming up again and again, and that is, it seems like there's a lot of agents out there that suffer from a type of call reluctance called telephobia. Telephobia is an irrational fear to pick up the phone and use it for business. Now, you can use the phone to call to get a new pizza, or order a pizza or Chinese takeout food, whatever you want to do. That's not a problem. But picking up the phone for business, it's like this thing, this inanimate plastic object, is wired to 440 volts, and if you touch it, it's going to shock you. Well, it's kind of fun discussing this with them because over the years of being a broker for over 30 years and a real estate business for 30 years, a trainer, I've run across several techniques that will cure telephobia in about 3 to 5 days. All they had to do was ask me, and they did. So that's why we're doing this little DVD so that you too can overcome telephobia. But it's going to take some work. But the good news is you could cure telephobia in only 3 to 5 days using the techniques that I'm going to show you on this DVD. It's going to take a lot of motivation on your part. You're going to really want to have to do this. You're going to have to do a little soul searching. But you know what? You're going to have a little fun too. And when you're done with this process, you're never going to fear the phone again. Now, the first thing we need to understand is what causes telephobia. Where did it come from? Why do so many salespeople have this problem? Well, the truth is, top producing salespeople don't have this problem. But mid-range producers and low producers or new people who are just starting a profession often have this problem. And it's seen in real estate offices across the country that if people would just pick up the phone and do more prospecting, they'd have more business, but they just can't seem to do it. So where did it all come from? Well, years ago, I had the opportunity to work with 2 behavioral science researchers. One of them was named George Dudley, and the other was Shannon Goodson. And George and Shannon spent 10 years of their life studying call reluctance. And only us behavioral research scientists could do and keep their interest for that long. They dug into this and they figured out what all the causes were of call reluctance. And they came up with some cures. So I want to give credit where credit's due. This is the book that they put out. It's called The Psychology of Call Reluctance. Are You Earning What You're Worth in Sales by George Dudley and Shannon Goodson. And I read this book. I actually flew to Dallas and took the cure and became certified to teach in their techniques. So we're going to talk about some of the techniques that they have to cure telephobia, as well as a couple other fun things I've added on my own that I picked up over the years that can really help you cure this problem. Are you ready? Okay. Now, once again, where did it come from? Well, George and Shannon did a lot of research into this, and they figured, after all this research, that telephobia is a learned response. It's a habit that we got into. And George, who told me about this, figured that telephobia started with that 15-year-old adolescent calling for his first date. Okay, so here he goes. First he goes to the phone and he gets half through the number and he hangs up again because he's afraid to call the girl, right? Of course, in today's society, it could be the girl calling the boy too. But anyway, the point, and maybe they're less fearful. But anyway, the point is, he kept calling and calling and finally got up enough guts to call her. He asks for the date and she turns him down. And it's like this created an electric shock through his body, and it was a bad experience, and that's what started telephobia. Calling to solicit either a date or to solicit someone to come to an activity or to solicit a vote or whatever it was that this adolescent player was doing stuck with him. And George figures that's probably where it came from, or a similar type experience. Well, if a habit can be learned, a habit can be unlearned. So I'm going to teach you 3 of the main techniques to overcome telephobia. Now, there are 7 in total, but I'm going to teach you 3 of the most powerful ones that'll cure you in 5 to well, maybe it'll take you a whole week if you're really a hard case, okay? They are threat desensitizing, thought zapping, and sensory injection. Pretty fancy names. So let's take them one at a time and talk about it. Now remember, you got to be motivated to get this done. You have to be motivated, okay? So let's talk about threat desensitizing. What is this all about? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to relax. In threat desensitizing, the most important thing is you have to learn to relax on cue. Now here's what I want you to do. Okay, I want you to take your left hand and I want you to put it into a tight fist. And as you clench this tight fist, I want you to notice what's happening in the rest of your body. Now my arm is shaking a little bit because I'm clenching so tight. You know, my breathing has changed, my temperature has actually, gone up a little bit, and I'm feeling tension all through my body now. Okay, now the next thing I want you to do is kind of feel that's happening, recognize what's happening with your breathing, and then I want you to imagine looking at this fist through a telescope or a pair of binoculars, and they're only focusing on the fist. Now, imagine this in your mind as you're doing this exercise. And then, here's the main part. You have to learn to relax on cue. So, as you're doing all this, what I want you to do is you say to yourself the word set. Now when you say set, I want you to imagine in your head that the big sign is like maybe illuminated, is in front of your fist now, and it just says set. Now hold that for 2 seconds, and then the word relax. When you relax, I want you to open your fists, and I want you to take your left index finger and touch your thumb. Relax. Relax. And just lower your breathing, lower your tension, and just relax. Okay, so once again, tension, tension, set, 1001, 1002, see the sign, relax, relax, relax. Well, I'm relaxed. How about you? That's the first step. You have to learn how to relax on cue. Okay, so once you've learned that, then we have to take a threat inventory. Now I've jotted down some things here. I'll refer to my notes, but what scares you about using the phone? And write these down, and just brainstorm them a little bit. Do some thinking. Is it for perhaps preparing to call on the phone? It's just the fact that I'm getting ready to do cold calling, puts you in a tizzy. It creates all that tension in you like we had a moment ago. Is that it? Or is it actually making the calls? Actually doing the dials and holding the phone up to your ear? Is this what causes all the tension and causes all the nervousness? Or maybe it's thinking about making the calls. Even just thinking about it puts you in kind of a tizzy. Maybe it's feeling like you're unprepared for any questions that might come up. Oh my goodness, what if they ask me a question I'm not prepared for? What am I going to say? Maybe it's being watched by your sales manager or trainer. Oh gosh, I know he's lurking about here somewhere. He'll listen in and he'll make fun of me, or I'll disappoint him in some way. Some people that I've actually trained on how to cure their telephobia have told me they're afraid that they'll actually get physically sick during the call session, that they'll throw up on the phone or something like that. Some people are afraid that they'll call someone and they'll be mad. They'll be mad that they called, or maybe they're mad from something else, another call or something like that. And they'll just happen to their luck, they dial the number, and that guy's already mad on the other end of the phone. He's going to take it out on them. They're just absolutely mad. Or maybe some people are afraid that being on the phone will cause such a bad experience they'll be depressed for the rest of the day. Now, whatever it is, I want you to make an inventory of all your fears. Write them down on a yellow pad. And just write till you can't think of any more. If you have 10 or 20 or 15, whatever it is. That's the first step. Make a list of all your fears. Now the next step is to assign points to them. we're going to call these a threat ranking. And the maximum, most horrible threat would be 100. So assign that one 100 points, and that's, we might call these well, just call them disaster points if you want to, but there are 100 points. And then something that's not quite so threatening might be 20 points or 10 points, 15 points. So go back through your list now and assign a value to how horrible is this threat to you. Now once you've assigned a value, we're ready for the next step. You order these threats by their value, putting the highest one at the top and the lowest one at the bottom. So here's what you've done. First of all, you've learned to relax on cue. You know, you're all tense, relax. First it's set, 1001, 1002, and then relax. You've learned to relax on cue. Practice that till you get that down. You've made a threat inventory. You put the highest threat on the top and the lowest threat on the bottom. Now we're ready for the real meat of this exercise, which is to move through the ranks. Now you start at the bottom, and you got to go somewhere where you're all alone, you know, where you can relax and be comfortable. You know you won't be disturbed for a while, you know, maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes that you might be doing this exercise. And then you sit down in a very comfortable setting. You get very relaxed. Use your code words, you know, remember, set and relax, those are your code words. And you get very relaxed, and then you look at the lowest threat, and then you close your eyes, and you envision, you picture that. What would that feel like? Where would you be? How would your breathing be? What would your body be doing with that threat? Now, once you get a really firm picture of what that threat is like, then you use your code words. First it was set, and then relax. Deep breath, blow it out. Then you reset, and you do it all over again. You try to envision the threat again. You picture it as clearly as you can. You get it right to that moment when you've really got it, and then it's set, relax. Now, the second time you did it, you're going to discover it's harder to picture the threat. To really anchor this home after you've relaxed, you say to yourself these words. You say, I can see myself in this situation, but now I can allow myself to be more relaxed. I can see myself in a situation, but now I can allow myself to be more relaxed. You do that 2 or 3 times, and here's what you're going to discover. You pretty much feel more comfortable with that threat. So, you're done with that one. Take it off the bottom. Have you ever noticed how maybe your kids or your grandkids have been playing with blocks and they stack them all up high, and you take the bottom block out and the stack goes what? Down. You take another bottom one out and the stack goes down again. What will happen is as you take the threats off the bottom, the ones that were 100 before drop down to 80. Then they drop to 70. Then they drop to 60. The lower ranking threats, you'll feel more relaxed when they come up again. And the higher ranking threats, some of those are going to be pretty tough to control. We're going to have to use some of our other techniques to get rid of those entirely. But they will come down on that pile of blocks, and as they come down, you'll be less fearful of those. Well, that's threat desensitizing. You need to do this about 3 times in a row and for each threat, and you need to practice this maybe a couple times a week for maybe half an hour. And eventually you'll become more and more comfortable with those threats. So that's the first technique. It's based on learning how to relax on cue, inventorying your threats, ranking your threats, and then working from the bottom up, eliminating the ones in the bottom to where you're feeling more and more comfortable with them. I can see myself in that situation now, but I can feel more relaxed about it. Now, obviously, this is going to take a motivated person. You've got to really want to overcome telephobia. But remember, sometimes it's just a tiny edge that gets you to the big money. You know, there is no second place, folks. There's first place and there's nothing, okay? So if you don't get on this phone and get more and more prospects, and if you're not good on the phone with your prospects, there is no second place. So eliminating telephobia is that important. So do you really have the motivation to do it? Well, we'll see. That's the first one, threat desensitizing. Now the second one is sensory injection. Sensory injection is actually fun. What you do in sensory injection is you have to find a fragrance cue. Now, this is one of my favorites. It's called Grandma's Holiday Kitchen. And when I spray this, it reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. You know, Grandma was a wonderful baker, and you go in her kitchen and she always had around holiday season, you know, the sugar cookies, and she's always doing things with cinnamon, and that's what this smells like. And whenever I smell that smell, it puts me in a better state, okay? And we're going to show you how to make this work. So first you have to select your fragrance. Here's some fragrances that other folks that I've worked with have used. Hey, this is very personal, so you've got to find out what your fragrance cue is going to be. One person I worked with loved fresh cut grass. Made him feel good. And he was a big golfer, and he was very relaxed and happy on the golf course. And when you go out there and the greens had just been cut, because he's one of the first tee times out there, and he'd smell that, and it put him in the right phrase. So that right frame of mind, that right stage. And so what he did was he went out, and that's what he did. He got some fresh cut grass, and he would smell that when he wanted to be in that state. Soap can do it for some people. You know, there's all kinds of soap and different kinds of soap. Maybe when you were a child, you know, your mother had a favorite soap, and it reminds you of your mother or your grandmother, or that works for a lot of people. I had one friend who was a sharpshooter in the military, and he had trained himself to be extremely relaxed when he was behind the trigger. And so for him, he had a spent cartridge case, and he would just sniff that cartridge case, and it would put him into a relaxed state. Of course, that's hard to get through airport security now. And then I had another one that's fresh baked bread, or a Christmas, you know, which was one that I like to use. Or one guy liked mud. I don't know, mud made him happy. Go figure. And then there was another one that used eucalyptus, because it was an unusual smell that you don't have very often. It was easy for him to cue that into the relaxed state. Or camphor. So whatever it is, you have to select a fragrance cue. Windsong perfume, you know, is another one that people like to use. Now, once you've selected your fragrance, you have to have that ready. And then you get yourself into the desired state. Well, the desired state, folks, is relaxation. You know, when you're nervous and telephobic, what's happening is you're just so wrought emotionally that you can't do it very well. So the opposite of being distressed would be relaxed. And so get yourself in a relaxed state, whatever gets you there. Music works for a lot of people. Soft music, soft lights, deep breathing. Some people use prayer. Some people use self-hypnosis or a type of meditation. But whatever it is, get yourself in that state. Now, when you're in that state with as little physical action as you can do, okay, you need to connect that state with your fragrance cue. So, you're all relaxed. You're where you need to be. And you're feeling good. And you anchor the fragrance to that state. Okay. Now, you need to fortify this with practice. Probably once a day for about 5-6 days, and then your olfactory senses and your brain will all be wired up with this scent. Okay. Now, guess what you do when it's time to do your cold calls? You're getting a little agitated. Geez, I got to do these cold calls again. Man, I don't want to do that. What do? And what do? You relax. And it helps you get on the phone. Well, that's called sensory injection. Another type of sensory injection is using a visual cue. It's pretty much the same thing. You get yourself in the desired state. Now, I like to use these little yellow dots. You know, you can get them in any office supply store anywhere. But you get yourself in the desired relaxed state with your eyes closed. And then you have a dot ready, because remember, you have to anchor this. You have to connect this with that state. And then when you're there, you open your eyes and you'll get a little yellow dot. Do it again, yellow dot. Do it again, yellow dot. Now guess what you do? You take that yellow dot and you put it right on the object that's causing you all the grief. You stick it right here on the phone. Okay? And so it's a visual cue now, so when you see that yellow dot, oh, yeah, I'm okay. And then you can go ahead and do your calls. Now, when you're not doing your calls, take the dot off and put it somewhere else. Because if you overuse your yellow dot, it will desensitize it, and so it won't work anymore. So a couple of sensory injections you can do to help cure you and get a handle on this telephobic thing. Now, you're not going to have to do these forever. You're not. But you can use them in other settings as well. It works for other things besides just telephobia. But you can imagine what those might be. You know, you have to give a speech. Well, I'm better off, you know, and so you just relax. Anytime you need to relax, you can use those. But we're talking how we'd apply this strictly to telephobia now. So when you're ready to go, you give yourself maybe an aroma shot, and then you have to continue to reinforce these things. Now remember, telephobia was a habit. We can cure it in about 7-8 days, 5 days, 7 days, somewhere in there, but it could come back too. So you're going to have to kind of reinforce these things every once in a while, okay? So here's another thing you can do, and this is probably the most powerful thing of all, and that is thought zapping. You see, thought zapping is a way of interrupting negative thoughts, and it's based on some very basic principles. First of all, thought zapping will only work if you're a very motivated person. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning, but are you truly motivated to get rid of your telephobia? If you are, thought zapping is the most powerful tool you can use. But you have to be motivated, okay? And you have to be motivated specifically to get rid of telephobia. Second, your feelings can enhance or impede your prospecting by phone. You know that to be true. Because if you're all upset and you can't get on the phone because you're telephobic, it's your feelings that are interfering with your ability to get on this phone and get business. So it impedes you. But it could also enhance if we could just get the right feelings. But feelings come from thoughts and habits and programming. So habits, be they good or bad, are strengthened when they are repeated again and again. But also, habits are weakened when you're interrupted. And that's the thing about thought zapping. It's an interruption in that thought process. So, here are the steps on how to do this. The first step in thought zapping is you've got to do some introspective thinking to the extent that you keep a tab on how many negative thoughts come into your head as you approach prospecting on the telephone. So for an 8-hour period, if you were going to maybe do 2 call sessions or whatever, you would keep a little slash mark how many times a negative thought would come into your head. And maybe over this 8-hour period of time, you had 11 thoughts that were negative about prospecting on the telephone. 11 times. Now this is the pre-cure tally, okay? And it's 11. So you know your baseline is 11. My goodness, you're extremely telephobic. It might be 35, okay? 35 negative thoughts pop in your head. And we inventoried some of those threats earlier. It's those type of thoughts. So now you have a tally. The second thing is you have to zap that intruding thought. You have to zap the intruder. Now, in order to do thought zapping correctly, you need to go out and procure a very powerful tool. It's one of these, a thick rubber band. And what you do with this thick rubber, now not a thin one, they hurt too much, but a thick one like this, okay, is you put this rubber band on your wrist. This becomes your thought zapper, and you wear it on your wrist like this. Now it's time to do telephone prospecting, and I'm getting a negative thought that's coming into my head. Well, it's time to zap that intruder. So what you do is you pick up your rubber band and you zap it, okay? Now don't do it on this side, it hurts too much. Do it on this side, okay? It's tougher here than here, okay? You zap. Now, that's a physical means of interrupting that thought. You see, this is your senses, this is visual senses, and they work great, but this is more powerful than both of those. Now, you can use them all in conjunction, but the thought zapping, it interrupts that thought. Now, you interrupt, that's the first step, and then you visualize when you snap a stop sign, a big stop sign in front of you. You know, they're red, and you've seen a gazillion of them, and it's stop. Now, when you start this process, the first few times you do it, you need to yell stop out loud. So, you know, be in a setting where you can do that, okay? I mean, you know, you yell out around the office, people are going to get curious about what's going on. So it's like, stop, when you zap. So you zap, you yell stop. Now, once you've done that physically out loud a few times, you can do it in your head. So negative thought, you zap. Immediately, when you zap and you see stop in your head, okay, immediately you would need to think of something positive about you. A time when you felt good. Something you did, a good deed for someone, or you got praise from someone. So it's immediately you zap, you see stop, and then you immediately replace that negative intruder with something positive about yourself. That's the process. And then you keep track of how many times you had to zap. Okay? So here's what's going to happen. If you're extremely telephobic and you're approaching the phone to use this phone, you got your thought zapper ready. And man, it might be a stop. Ooh. Oh yeah, I helped that old lady across the street. Yeah, okay, I'm all right. And then you measure, okay, how to zap. Now here's what's going to happen. The first day, if you're really bad, you got 38 negative thoughts, you had to zap yourself 38 times. The next time you do a call session, you may only have to zap 15 times. This is maybe later that afternoon or maybe the next day. The next time is maybe only be 5 times. Eventually what's going to happen is you feel the thought coming on, you just glance at the rubber band and you don't even have to zap and it's gone. This is very, very powerful. You know, people have kicked very addictive habits using this thought zapping technique. But once again, it's zap, stop, stop, and then positive thought, and then get after it. Okay. Those are 3 techniques that you could use that, quite frankly, and then of course measure the post so you can actually see your progress. That will make a tremendous difference. And there's no reason for you to be telephobic. It's just a habit. You learned it. Using these 3 techniques, you can unlearn it as well. Now let me share some fun things with you that could help reinforce the fact you don't have telephobia any longer. And these are some things that I've helped people do over the years. You know, I have a very old friend in the business, and we've been friends in the real estate business now for about 24 years, that was extremely telephobic. He was one of the most severe cases of telephobia I've ever seen. And so he wrote letters as his prospecting, but at one time in his career, the letters just quit working. He had to give it a little extra oomph, so he either had to go, see the people in person, which was impractical for him because they were all over the valley, or he had to actually pick up the phone and call. But he was extremely telephobic. Well, we're good friends. He came to me for help. And besides teaching him these word-based and sensory injection and physical procedures, I made my friend accompany me downtown one day to buy a very expensive headset. Now, you have to understand that my friend is, well, politely you'd say he's very thrifty. Not so polite, you'd say he's cheap. But he doesn't like to spend money unnecessarily. So I took him into a electronics type store and we bought a very expensive headset for him. Kind of like this one here. This is a Plantronics headset. And I knew that if my friend spent over $150 for this headset, that he's not going to let it go to waste. Okay? So here's what he did. He bought the headset and he put the headset on as he was planning to get on the phone. Now, he had already cured his telephobia with the techniques I've already discussed with you. But putting on the headset was kind of like putting on his gear. And then he went out and he bought one of those Italian driving gloves. The kinds that have, the knuckles with little circle holes cut out on them, and the fingers are cut out, and it snaps here underneath, He bought one of those, and then he put on his dialing glove and then snap it into place. And so what Sid was doing really was he was putting on his gear. I mean, how many of you have been involved with athletic activities where, you play football or you play tennis or whatever it is you do, but you put on your gear? You put on your special shoes, you put on your special outfit, you get all suited up and you get ready to go out there and play. That's what he was doing. He was putting on his gear. But putting on the gear became a habit for him, and all of a sudden he was ready to what? Today, my friend Sid is a cold calling animal. I mean, he's great on the phone, and he gets on the phone at least 6 times a week, procuring business, and it's paid for him. It's paid off for him big time. I mean, this guy, everything he touches or drives in or lives in is all paid for, and it's all because he got on the what? He got on the phone. Well, you can do the same thing. I have another close friend who uses this technique, and I've used this too. This technique involves just a simple mirror. And what you do with just a simple mirror is you prop it up, right here by your telephone, so that as you're on the phone, I can see myself. And if you smile while you're talking on the phone, it comes across, and And that became very helpful to him. Now, in addition to seeing himself, he got this really funny gesture hat, okay? Because what he did before his telephone sessions is he put on a hat and he would look in the mirror and he said, you know what, you look absolutely ridiculous. But it would come across. In other words, he was going out to have some what? Fun. It's time to have some fun on the phone. And so today he puts on this hat and he looks in the mirror, he laughs at himself, he gets on the phone, he continues to wear the hat. I don't know how the bells work out, but that's what he does, and that works for him. You know, these are techniques that'll work for you too. Getting on the phone is the most efficient means of prospecting. If you use these techniques and you're real motivated and you really apply them, you're going to cure telephobia. The telephone is an important instrument to our business. You need to learn how to use it. You need to learn how to have no fear of it. It's just this little thing that will become your friend. Your phone will be your friend. And you need to make your phone your friend, and you need to have no fear of it. Well, this is Rick Roller. Thanks for listening and watching this short little DVD. It will cure your telephobia problems, so get after it. And if I could ever help you, you can find me at my website, www.rickroller.com. That's RickRoller.com.